Alrighty, everyone, welcome back to the Articulate Women podcast. It's been about a month since I've posted a new episode, and this is your reminder that you are never behind. You're allowed to get busy, and I was dealing with finals for grad school, and I had to put the podcast aside for a few weeks, but I'm back, and I'm gonna pick up where I left off. And we're going to get some goodness out of the scriptures. No matter when you read the scriptures, even if it's not the week that Come Follow Me has you read certain verses, certain chapters, the Lord still has something in store for you to learn and gather from those chapters. So I want to just encourage you that you are not behind. You are right where you need to be, that God always has a message for you, even if it's not the week that we're studying right now at church. Okay, so where we're left off is 2 Nephi, chapters 6 through 10. And what we have now is Nephi has turned the plates over to his brother Jacob, and he has begun to prophesy and teach. And we've got some intermingling of the books of Isaiah as well as prophecies and preachings from Jacob. There's some really great verses in here, and there's some really powerful verses from Isaiah as well. So I'm just going to talk about a handful of my favorites and then share an experience I had with one particular verse. The first thing I want to point out is that in chapter 6, verse 8, we have Jacob prophesying and testifying that a prophecy has been fulfilled. He says that the Lord has shown me from those who were at Jerusalem, from whence we came, have been slain and carried away captive. And this is what we talked about again in the first week when we discussed how Laman and Lemuel were so upset to leave Jerusalem. They're like, no, Jerusalem will never fall. And we went over the king of Judah and how they had already invaded Jerusalem twice at that point when Lehi and his family left. And so now we know, and if we go back to Kings, you know that about 11 years after that initial siege, that they came back and utterly destroyed Jerusalem and took captive the rest of the people that were left. And so we know that both that prophecy has been fulfilled, that Jerusalem has been destroyed, and we know that in that effort, the Lehi and his family were saved, and which is where we get this beautiful Book of Mormon and this other branch of the family of Israel. What's really beautiful too about this section of chapters is that what we also see over and over again, both in the prophesying from Jacob and from the books in Isaiah that he reads, that just as this scattering is happening very currently, as Lehi and his family have been in the depths of the wilderness for over a decade, that in the midst of their scattering, that he begins to testify of the gathering of Israel as well. Just to vary the verse after that, in verse 9 of chapter 6, Jacob says, "Nevertheless, the Lord has shown unto me that they should return again, and that the Lord will manifest himself unto them." So even in the midst of this trial and what likely their brothers and sisters are dealing with in Jerusalem and being carried away into Babylon, that he testifies that the Lord has a plan, that they will be gathered once they have been scattered, that they will come back to Jerusalem, and that the Lord will come to visit them there, and continues to testify of Jesus Christ and his coming. And it's just a beautiful way to kind of see that God has a plan overall, this people and for the children of Israel. In chapter 8, this one is actually Isaiah. He says, "Therefore the redeemed of the Lord shall return and come with singing unto Zion, and everlasting joy and holiness shall be upon their heads, and they shall obtain gladness and joy. Sorrow and mourning shall flee away. I am he, yea, I am he that comforteth you. Behold, who art thou, and thou shouldst be afraid of man." And he just talks about the wonderfulness of our Lord and Savior and how he will redeem and gather us and comfort us in our trials. The language of Isaiah in these chapters is just so beautiful. But I love that there's this promise of gathering in the midst of the crisis of being scattered and taken by Babylon at that time. Okay, so the verse I wanted to kind of focus on, that I wanted to share my experience about, is from Isaiah. So we're in We're in chapter 8 of 2 Nephi, where Jacob is recounting the words of Isaiah. And in verse 3 it says, "For the Lord shall comfort Zion. He will comfort all her waste places, and he will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody." And what I really wanted to share with you was an experience I had over the last couple of years that kind of happened because of this verse and similar verses in Isaiah, where he talks about gardens and the Garden of Eden and waste places and similar things. In April of 2020, so if you guys can remember back then, this was the first month of COVID where we're all just going stir crazy, and this is the very beginning of the pandemic, and we can't believe what is going on. And my mental health really began to take a fall, as was true for many people at that time because we were so isolated. I had been a stay-at-home mom up until then, and so not a lot had changed, but at the same time, my twins had stopped napping. And now my husband was working from home, and we were all just kind of in the house all the time. And it was just a tricky thing to navigate. Our lives had changed, and we couldn't really go anywhere. We couldn't see anyone. And I need social interaction to do well. And so not being able to have that and kind of the fear of the unknown was really taking its toll on me and impacting my marriage as well. And so there was one night where I turned to the scriptures and to my patriarchal blessing. And there's a verse or a section in my patriarchal blessing that talks about gardens and flowers in a metaphorical sense. And so I had turned to the scriptures to kind of find something similar, see if I could study it to find any further insights. And I ended up spending a lot of time in Isaiah and coming to that verse that Jacob shares, as well as several others that were very similar sentiments. And what I got from that experience from the Lord was, you need to plant a garden. And so we had this raised bed in our backyard that that came with the house, which was a great benefit when we had bought it a few years prior. And so it was finally time to really find its potential and plant a garden. And so I did a lot of research, found a place to buy good dirt, because the dirt in that plot was dust and rocks and just not a good place to start planting. Made a plan for what I was going to plant, and it kind of started going. And this was a time where I really was like unsure of it, but I kept moving forward. I really was like, I'm super depressed, and you want me to plant a garden? Like, I can barely get out of bed, and you want me to have this huge project to work on. But I was kind of desperate for direction, and so I trusted the Lord in that moment. So I started doing research and found what I needed to do. I had someone lend me their truck so I could get a big, truckload of dirt, and I had someone fix up the sprinkler systems and did some more research about, how to plant the plants and where, who should be planted next to who and all of that. Ended up planting some tomatoes, some lavender, some other things. I did a couple different batches of plants over that summer. I think I did kale as well and some lettuce. But it was a really tumultuous time, and I was super stressed. And having this one thing to focus on was really helpful. I had really felt like it had become difficult to hear the voice of the Lord in my life at that time. COVID just kind of made that worse, and I just felt like a little bit disconnected. And when your mental health is not good, it can be very difficult to hear the Spirit. That's an experience that many people have shared as well. So that's not an uncommon experience for people, unfortunately. And so what I found is that I was starting to get messages, if you will, through my garden and these beautiful metaphors of how to relate to my life and how to help me in my life through these things that I learned from my garden. So what happened was the main plants I was focusing on were my tomatoes, and I had 4 tomato plants, or 6 rather. I started with 6, and very quickly 2 died. And so I just had 4. And then at some point I had some tomato hornworms attack my plants. And I would go out to my garden almost every day and check on everything. And, the kids would play in the backyard while I tended to the garden. And I remember one particular day I looked out and I was like, why are there so many leaves missing? Like, it's like someone had picked the leaves on the top of the plant. And I was like, oh, it's probably nothing. And I just kind of, didn't think much of it. And I was like, oh, I'll go check on them later. And then the next day I go out and almost all the leaves are gone from the 2 larger plants. And I'm like in a panic trying to figure out what in the world happened. And after more further inspection, I see these giant tomato hornworms, which are almost 3 or 4 inches long by this point. They're just hanging out on my plants, having eaten all of the leaves and all of the blossoms that could have turned into tomatoes. And so I had to very precariously get these tomato hornworms off of my plants, and I threw them the road next to our house. I kind of had to start over. I was determined to get these plants to continue to grow. And so I paid extra attention to them. And one plant took a great deal of time to get its flower or its leaves back, but one didn't take as long. And it was interesting to see that 2 plants very much in the same place and with the same sunlight, the same water, all those things, that they reacted to their environment differently and they recovered and they healed in a different way. And so it was kind of cool to, again, relate my life and my healing to these tomato plants. Eventually they got their leaves back, and the summer was starting to get a little bit later at this point, where they should have been blooming at that point and they were not. And then I looked out the window another day and I saw that there was some leaves missing, and I knew right away what to look for. And so I went out there, I jumped off of the couch and I was like, those worms are back. And I did research on what I could make this little concoction in a spray bottle and spray it on the tomato leaves to help the bugs to not disturb them anymore. And I got rid of another tomato hornworm that was smaller and was able to kind of save that tomato plant. And then very shortly after, the first tomatoes started to arrive. And this was probably September. And again, this is when the harvest should have been over. But this is when I finally started to get tomatoes. And it took about a month for them to turn red. And I just started to learn how timing is going to be different for everyone. And also that there's a season for certain things. What ended up happening was I had a handful of tomatoes that bloomed and turned red, and we were able to eat them. And then the weather started to get a little bit colder, and so I had some time where I draped them in sheets to get them through some cold nights. And I had at that point maybe 50 or so tomatoes, but they were all green. And so I was trying to protect them from the cold and still allow them to grow and continue to progress so that they could turn red and be picked. And what ended up happening is the weather continued to change, and it was clear that those tomatoes were never going to turn red. About the same time, as I found throughout the whole process of growing this garden, was that what was going on in my garden was very much a metaphor for what was going on in my life. And what I realized around that same time, as I decided to pick the green tomatoes and savor the harvest that I had received, but that it was time for the tomato plants to move on. And it was time for me to do my next round of winter planting and plant different plants for the next season. What I also realized at that time was that my marriage was going to be over. It was my garden that helped me to really see that. And something about having a physical representation of your plants are not going to change colors and they're not going to be the fruit that you thought they were, was a really helpful way for me to see that things in my life were not going to change and they were not going to be the way that they were supposed to be, that I thought that they were going to be. And it was a really wonderful thing to see that God knew what was going on in my life and knew the people in my life well enough to know that 6 months before, if he told me to plant a garden, that he could continue to teach me when I was feeling maybe a little bit lost and forgotten, that he could teach me through my garden. And having that project helped my mental health, but it also helped my spiritual health, and be able to hear and see God in a different way, and be able to understand the beautiful metaphor that comes through the earth and plants and gardens and all of those things that are created by God, that it all kind of comes back to the same principles. And what I really appreciated about that time was that I live in Las Vegas, and it's a desert. And so one of the reasons I had to get new dirt was because the dirt here is garbage, and you have to find dirt that actually will help a plant to grow. And so my waste place was very much turned into an Eden, where I had a bountiful harvest and large plants. Like some of these tomato plants were almost 5 feet tall. Even if those tomatoes never turned red, I had a bounteous harvest. What was miraculous to me was that God knew what was going on in my life and how to teach me that, and how to have the timing work out, to know that he could show me that there could be bounty in the desert, and that there could be goodness even when I felt like things were falling apart, and that he knows what's going on, and he knew how to help comfort me and guide me through that whole process. Going back to this week's scripture, in 2 Nephi chapter 9, again, where Jacob is speaking, he says, "Oh, how great the holiness of our God, for he knoweth all things, and there is not anything save he knows it." And I just love the idea of a God who knows all things, and that he reveals them to me in a time and in a way that is what I need, and is not going to push me or make things more difficult, but he's going to gently lead me along the path that I need, and to help me realize things in my own time. And he's going to be there along the path, and really being able to have that garden and have that waste place turn into an Eden in my backyard helped me to see that there are bounteous things in my life, even if sometimes the season for one thing is over. And I just want to testify that God is the master gardener, and he can absolutely turn your waste place into an Eden, even if it's not exactly what you think. And I'm grateful for Jacob and his wonderful words, and the words of Isaiah, and how they have helped me to see God in my life. I love that the beautiful words spoken about God can be seen in all of our lives, and I love being able to apply the scriptures to my life. It's such a powerful way, like, that we can add our witness to what we have in the Book of Mormon, that we can also have our own testament of Jesus Christ based on what we learn and what we read in our reading each week. And I encourage you guys to think about how you can add your witness to Jacob's and to Nephi's, and how you can be another testament in the people in your life and make an impact. Just this last week, we had a great broadcast for the Relief Society with all of the wonderful sister leaders and from President Nelson. And our voices matter, and what we have to say matters. There's people in your life that need to hear what you have to say about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I encourage you to speak up, because your voice matters. Thanks for being here.